How did one night out at the club, while wearing my wedding ring, end with a process server handing me divorce papers at work? What did my husband uncover that made him go from silent suffering to taking control? And what did everyone around us really see? This is the story of how I lost everything I thought I could manipulate and justify. My name is Eirene Veyra, and I'm 34 years old. I work as an administrative assistant at a mid-sized accounting firm downtown. I've been married to Simon for 8 years, and we have a beautiful 7-year-old daughter named Lila. On the surface, we looked like the perfect suburban family. But underneath, I felt trapped, invisible, and desperate for something more. That Friday night in October changed everything. My younger sister Loren had been pushing me to go out for weeks. "You need to live a little, Eirene," she'd say during our lunch breaks. "You're wasting your best years playing house with someone who doesn't even notice you anymore." She wasn't wrong. Simon had become distant over the past year, buried in his IT analyst work, coming home late and barely looking up from his laptop during dinner. When was the last time he'd complimented me? When was the last time he'd made me feel desired? "Come on, Simon," I said that Friday evening as I applied my makeup in our bedroom mirror. "It'll be fun, just like old times." He looked up from his phone, his brown eyes tired behind his glasses. "I don't know, Eirene. I've got that project deadline Monday, and you know how I feel about clubs." "That's exactly why you need this," I insisted, turning to face him. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a black dress that hugged my curves, heels that made my legs look endless. "When's the last time we went out together? When's the last time we had fun?" Simon sighed, running his hand through his thinning hair. "Fine, but just for a few hours, okay?" The club was everything I'd hoped for: loud music, flashing lights, and the intoxicating energy of people my age letting loose. Loren had invited her usual crowd, including Kellen Dre, Simon's old college friend. Kellen had always been the opposite of Simon, confident, flirtatious, the kind of man who made women feel special just by looking at them. "Eirene," Kellen's voice cut through the music as we found our table. "You look absolutely stunning tonight." His eyes lingered on my dress, and I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in years. "Thank you," I said, letting my hand brush his arm as I sat down. "You clean up pretty well yourself." Simon settled beside me, already looking uncomfortable. The music was too loud for him, the crowd too young, the atmosphere too charged with sexuality. I could see him checking his phone every few minutes. "Relax, babe," I shouted over the bass. "Have a drink. Enjoy yourself." But as the night progressed, I found myself caring less and less about Simon's comfort. Kellen kept buying rounds, and with each drink I felt more alive, more attractive, more like the woman I used to be before marriage and motherhood dulled my edges. "Dance with me," Kellen said during a particularly good song, extending his hand. I glanced at Simon, who was staring at his phone again. "Simon doesn't dance," I said to Kellen, taking his hand. "But I do." The dance floor was packed, bodies pressed together in the dim light. Kellen's hands found my waist, pulling me closer than was appropriate for a married woman. But God, it felt good to be wanted, to feel desired, to have someone's complete attention. "You're incredible," he whispered in my ear, his breath hot against my neck. I should have pulled away. I should have thought about my husband sitting alone at our table. Instead, I pressed closer, letting my body move against his in ways that left no doubt about our chemistry. When the song ended, I was breathless and exhilarated. We made our way back to the table where Simon sat rigid, his jaw clenched. "Having fun?" he asked, his voice tight. "Finally," I replied, downing the rest of my drink. "You should try it sometime." Loren leaned over, her eyes bright with alcohol and mischief. "Your sister's still got it, Simon. Look at all the guys checking her out." It was true. I could feel eyes on me from across the room, men appreciating what my husband had stopped noticing. When a stranger asked me to dance, I didn't hesitate. His name was Marcus, and he was everything Simon wasn't. tall, muscular, confident. He danced like he knew exactly what he was doing, his hands guiding my hips in rhythm with the music. I could feel my wedding ring pressing against his shoulder as we moved together, but instead of guilt, I felt defiant. "Your husband's watching," Marcus murmured, nodding toward our table. I turned to see Simon's face, pale with humiliation and anger. Our friends were watching too, some laughing, others looking uncomfortable. But instead of stopping, I pressed closer to Marcus. "Let him watch," I said. "Maybe he'll remember what he's been ignoring." When the song ended, I danced with another stranger, then another. Each time, I felt more vindicated, more alive. This was what I'd been missing: attention, desire, the intoxicating power of my own sexuality. It wasn't until I returned to our table, flushed and breathless, that I realized Simon was gone. "Where's my husband?" I asked Loren. She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "He left about 20 minutes ago. Said he wasn't feeling well." I felt a flicker of annoyance. Typical Simon, running away instead of fighting for what was his. "Did he say anything else?" "Just that he'd see you at home," Kellen said, but there was something in his expression that I couldn't read. I pushed down the tiny voice of guilt trying to surface. Simon had brought this on himself with his neglect, his distance, his refusal to see me as anything more than a wife and mother. If he couldn't handle seeing other men appreciate what he'd stopped valuing, that was his problem. The rest of the night blurred together in a haze of drinks, dancing, and validation. Kellen drove me home around 2 a.m, his hand resting on my thigh during the ride. "Tonight was incredible," he said as we sat in my driveway. "You're incredible." I should have gotten out of the car immediately. Instead, I lingered, basking in his attention. "Thank you for making me feel beautiful again." "You are beautiful, Eirene. Don't let anyone make you forget that." When I finally crept into the house, Simon was asleep in our guest room. The message was clear, but instead of remorse, I felt justified. If he wanted to punish me for having a good time, for remembering who I was before I became his wife, then so be it. I fell asleep in our empty bed, still wearing my dress, my wedding ring catching the moonlight streaming through the window. I woke up Saturday afternoon, with a pounding headache and the taste of regret in my mouth. The house was unusually quiet. No sounds of Simon's morning routine, no cartoons playing for Lila. I stumbled to the kitchen in last night's dress, my makeup smeared and my hair a mess. Simon was sitting at the breakfast table with Lila, helping her with a coloring book. They both looked up when I entered, and the contrast between their expressions was stark. Lila's face lit up with her usual morning smile, while Simon's remained carefully neutral. "Mommy!" Lila jumped up and ran to hug me. "Daddy made pancakes. Do you want some?" "Maybe later, sweetheart," I said, kissing the top of her head. "Mommy needs coffee first." As I moved around the kitchen, I could feel Simon's eyes on me. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken accusations. Finally, Lila finished her breakfast and ran upstairs to play, leaving us alone. "So," Simon said quietly, not looking up from his newspaper, "how was the rest of your night?" There it was, the opening I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. I poured myself coffee, with hands that shook slightly, buying time to formulate my response. "It was fine," I said, settling across from him at the table. "You missed a good time. Everyone was asking where you went." "I'm sure they were." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Especially after the show you put on." "Show?" I felt my defenses rising. "What show? I was dancing. At a club. Where people dance." "You were grinding against strangers while wearing your wedding ring, Eirene. Our friends were laughing about it. About us." The accusation hit like a slap, partly because it was true, and partly because of how pathetic it made him sound. "You're being dramatic, Simon. I danced with a few people. That's what people do at clubs." "That's not dancing, and you know it." He finally looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes. disgust. I watched my wife dry-humping strangers while our friends took videos and laughed about what a fool I am. Videos? The word came out sharper than I intended. Oh yes, videos. Loren was posting them on her Instagram story. Girls' night out, she called it, very classy. I felt a flutter of panic but pushed it down. You're making this bigger than it is. I was having fun for the first time in months. I'm sorry if that threatens you. Simon's laugh was bitter. Threatens me? Eirene, you humiliated me. You humiliated our marriage. And the worst part is, you don't even care. I care about our marriage, I shot back. But marriages go both ways, Simon. When's the last time you made me feel special? When's the last time you looked at me the way those men did last night? So this is my fault? He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I work 60 hours a week to provide for this family. I come home to help with Lila. I try to be a good husband and father. And because I don't worship the ground you walk on, you decide to act like a single woman at a club. You don't try to be a good husband, I said, standing to face him. You try to be a good provider. There's a difference. When's the last time you touched me? Really touched me? When's the last time you told me I was beautiful? I tell you you're beautiful all the time. No, you don't. You say you look nice when I get dressed up. You say thanks for dinner when I cook. You treat me like a roommate who happens to share your bed. Simon stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing my words, trying to find the truth in them. Finally, he shook his head. Even if that were true, it doesn't justify what you did last night. Nothing justifies that. He walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my coffee and my churning thoughts. Part of me wanted to follow him, to apologize, to try to bridge the growing chasm between us. But a larger part, the part that had felt alive for the first time in years last night, refused to back down. My phone buzzed with a text from Loren. OMG, last night was amazing. You looked so hot. Simon needs to get over himself. I smiled despite everything. At least someone understood. The rest of Saturday passed in uncomfortable silence. Simon spent most of the day in his home office, emerging only for meals and to spend time with Lila. I tried to act normal, playing with our daughter, doing laundry, preparing dinner. But underneath the domestic routine, I could feel something fundamental shifting in our relationship. That evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed Simon gathering his pillow and a blanket. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Sleeping in the guest room," he said without looking at me. "Simon, come on, don't be ridiculous." He turned to face me then, and the coldness in his expression made me step back. "I need some space, Eirene. I need to think about what I saw last night and what it means for our marriage." "It doesn't mean anything," I said quickly. "I was just blowing off steam. It's not like I cheated on you." "Didn't you?" The question hung in the air between us. "Maybe not technically, but what you did, it felt like cheating. It looked like cheating. And the fact that you can't see that, can't even apologize for it." He shook his head and walked toward the door. "Simon, wait." My voice was smaller now, uncertain. "We need to talk about this." "We did talk about it. You made it clear that this is my fault, that I somehow drove you to act like that, so I'm giving you the space you obviously need." After he left, I sat on our bed in the dark, staring at my wedding ring. For the first time since last night, I allowed myself to really think about what had happened. The dancing, the touching, the way I'd pressed against those men while my husband watched, the humiliation in Simon's eyes when I'd returned to the table. But then I thought about how invisible I'd felt for months, how Simon barely looked up when I entered a room, how our conversations had dwindled to logistics about Lila and household management. Didn't I deserve to feel desired? Didn't I deserve to feel alive? My phone buzzed again. This time it was Kellen. "Hope you made it home okay last night. You looked incredible. Would love to see you again soon." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Thanks for a wonderful evening. I had a great time." His response came immediately. "Maybe we could grab coffee sometime, just the two of us." I knew I should delete the message and block his number. I knew I should go to the guest room and apologize to my husband, beg for his forgiveness, promise to do better. Instead, I typed, "I'd like that." As I hit send, I heard Lila crying from her room. I rushed to check on her, finding her sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong, baby?" "I had a bad dream," she whispered, "and I heard you and Daddy fighting. Are you getting divorced like Emma's parents?" My heart clenched. "No, sweetheart. Daddy and I just had a disagreement. All married people disagree sometimes." "But Daddy's sleeping in the other room. Emma's daddy did that before he moved out." I gathered her into my arms, breathing in her little girl scent. "Daddy's not moving out. We're just working through some things. Everything's going to be okay." But as I held my daughter and listened to the silence from the guest room down the hall, I wondered if I was lying to both of us. Sunday morning brought an uncomfortable family breakfast and the prospect of our weekly lunch at Simon's parents' house. I dreaded facing Helen, Simon's mother, who had never quite approved of me and seemed to have an uncanny ability to sense when things weren't right in our marriage. "Do we have to go?" I asked Simon as he helped Lila get dressed. "Yes," he said without looking at me. "We go every Sunday. I'm not changing our routine because you're embarrassed." "I'm not embarrassed. I just don't feel like dealing with your mother's judgment today." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before Friday night." The drive to his parents' house was silent, except for Lila's chatter from the back seat. I stared out the window, dreading the next few hours and wondering how I was going to pretend everything was normal when my marriage was clearly falling apart. Helen and Martin Veyra lived in the same modest two-story house where Simon had grown up, complete with family photos covering every surface and the perpetual smell of Helen's famous pot roast. Under normal circumstances, I actually enjoyed our Sunday visits. Helen, despite her stern exterior, was a good grandmother to Lila, and Martin's gentle humor usually put everyone at ease. But today felt different from the moment we walked through the door. "There's my beautiful granddaughter." Helen swept Lila into a hug, but her eyes were on Simon and me, noting the careful distance we maintained from each other. "And how are my favorite couple doing?" "We're fine, Mom," Simon said, but his voice lacked its usual warmth. Helen's sharp eyes missed nothing. At 64, she'd raised 3 children and buried one husband before marrying Martin, and she had an uncanny ability to read people's moods. I could feel her studying me as we settled into the living room. "You look tired, Eirene," she observed. "Late night?" "We went out Friday," I said carefully. "First time in ages." "How nice. Where did you go?" Before I could answer, Lila piped up from where she was playing with her grandfather's chess set. "Mommy and Daddy had a fight. Daddy slept in the other room." The silence that followed was deafening. Helen's expression didn't change, but I saw her exchange a look with Martin that spoke volumes. "Children say the darndest things," I laughed nervously. Simon was working late and didn't want to wake me." "Of course," Helen said smoothly. "Martin, why don't you show Lila the new bird feeder in the backyard? I think the cardinals are back." As Martin led Lila outside, Helen turned to Simon and me with laser focus. "So, what really happened?" "Nothing happened, Helen," I said quickly. "We're fine." "Simon," she looked at her son who was staring at his hands. "We had a disagreement," he said finally, "about appropriate behavior." Helen's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. And this disagreement required separate sleeping arrangements." I felt my temper flare. "With all due respect, Helen, our sleeping arrangements are between Simon and me." "Not when they affect my granddaughter," she replied coolly. "Not when my son looks like he hasn't slept in days." "Mum," Simon warned, but Helen was just getting started. "Eirene, dear, would you mind helping me in the kitchen? I need another set of hands with the roast." It wasn't a request. I followed her into the kitchen, my stomach churning with anxiety. Helen moved efficiently around the familiar space, checking the oven, stirring gravy, all while maintaining an ominous silence. Finally, she turned to face me. Are you having an affair? The question hit like a physical blow. What? No. How can you even ask that? Because my son looks heartbroken, and in my experience, that usually means one thing. So I'll ask again, are you having an affair? I am not having an affair, I said firmly, clinging to the technical truth. I would never cheat on Simon. But you're thinking about it. It wasn't a question. I opened my mouth to deny it, but something in Helen's expression stopped me. This woman had raised 4 children, had been married for over 40 years, had seen every kind of marital crisis imaginable. She knew. I'm unhappy, I said finally. I feel invisible in my own marriage. Simon barely notices me anymore. So you decided to get noticed by other men? It wasn't like that. What was it like then? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're sabotaging your marriage because you're bored. You don't understand, I said, my voice rising. You don't know what it's like to feel like a stranger in your own life, to feel like your husband sees you as nothing more than a babysitter and housekeeper. I know exactly what that's like, Helen said sharply. I raised 4 children while working full-time and supporting a husband who traveled constantly for work. There were years when Martin and I barely spoke, except to coordinate schedules. But I didn't run off to clubs and throw myself at other men. I didn't throw myself at anyone. Didn't you? She pulled out her phone and my blood ran cold. Your sister posted some very interesting videos on Instagram. Would you like to see them? My mouth went dry. I don't know what you're talking about. Helen swiped through her phone and turned the screen toward me. There I was, in my black dress, pressed against a stranger on the dance floor. My wedding ring was clearly visible as my hands roamed over his shoulders, as I ground against him in ways that left no doubt about the nature of our dance. This is you, isn't it? Helen's voice was deadly quiet. This is my son's wife, acting like a single woman while he sits alone at a table, watching his friends mock him. I stared at the video, watching myself move against the stranger, seeing the expression of pure lust on my face. In the background, I could see our table, could see Simon's hunched shoulders and bowed head. It was just dancing, I whispered. That's not dancing, Eirene, that's foreplay. And you did it in public in front of people who know my son while wearing the ring he gave you. Helen's voice shook with controlled anger. How could you humiliate him like that? He humiliated himself by leaving, I said, but the words sounded weak even to me. He left because watching his wife simulate sex with strangers was too painful to endure. Any man with an ounce of self-respect would have done the same thing. I felt tears pricking my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You don't understand what our marriage has become. He doesn't touch me, doesn't talk to me, doesn't see me. So you decided to make him see by breaking his heart? Helen shook her head in disgust. That's not how marriage works, dear. That's how children behave. The kitchen door swung open and Simon walked in. He took one look at our faces and sighed. She showed you the videos, he said to Helen. I showed her what half the internet has seen by now, Helen replied. Your sister-in-law made sure of that. Simon looked at me with something approaching pity. Loren tagged me in the stories, Eirene, along with about 50 other people, my co-workers, our neighbors, people from church. Everyone's seen what you did. The room spun slightly. I'd been so focused on the immediate aftermath with Simon that I hadn't considered the broader implications. Our friends, our community, Lila's school. How many people had seen those videos? I didn't know she was posting them, I said desperately. I would have stopped her if I'd known. Would you? Simon asked quietly. Or would you have just made sure I wasn't tagged? Before I could answer, Martin and Lila came back inside, their faces flushed from the cold air. The tension in the kitchen was immediately obvious, and Martin's smile faded. Everything okay in here? He asked carefully. We're fine, I said quickly, but my voice cracked on the words. Lila looked between the 3 adults, her young face creased with worry. Are you fighting again? No, sweetheart, Helen said gently, but her eyes remained hard when they looked at me. "We're just having a discussion." The rest of lunch passed in uncomfortable silence, broken only by Martin's attempts at conversation and Lila's innocent chatter. I could feel Helen's disapproval radiating across the table, could see the way she kept glancing between Simon and me with barely concealed disgust. When we finally left, I felt like I could breathe again, but the relief was short-lived. "Your mother hates me," I said as we drove home. "She doesn't hate you," Simon replied. "She's disappointed in you. There's a difference. She had no right to show me those videos. That was between us." "Was it? Because according to the view count, about 300 people have seen them. Our business is everyone's business now, thanks to your sister and your need for attention." I wanted to argue, but the weight of what he was saying hit me. 300 people. Our neighbors, his co-workers, people we saw at Lila's school. How many of them were talking about us right now? How many were sharing the videos, laughing about the woman who couldn't keep her hands off strangers while her husband watched? That night, after Lila was asleep, I found Simon in his home office typing on his laptop. "What are you working on?" I asked from the doorway. "Nothing that concerns you," he said without looking up. "Simon, please, we need to talk about this. We need to figure out how to move forward." He finally looked at me, and the coldness in his eyes made me shiver. "Move forward? Eirene, you publicly humiliated me, our daughter, and our family. You acted like a single woman while wearing my ring. And when confronted about it, your response was to blame me for not making you feel special enough. That's exactly what you did. And now my mother has seen videos of my wife grinding against strangers. My co-workers are asking if I'm okay. Lila's teacher sent me a concerned email because apparently someone showed her the videos too." My stomach dropped. "Mrs. Patterson saw them." "Mrs. Patterson and half the PTA, according to her email. She wanted to make sure everything was okay at home, given what she'd seen online." I sank into the chair across from his desk, the full scope of my humiliation finally hitting me. It wasn't just about Simon and me anymore. It was about our reputation, our standing in the community, our daughter's well-being. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't think—" "No, you didn't think. You acted on impulse and selfishness, and now we're all paying the price." "What can I do? How can I fix this?" Simon was quiet for a long moment, his fingers stilled on the keyboard. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired and sad. "I don't know if you can, Eirene. I don't know if I want you to." After he said that, I noticed he was taking notes about everything. My comings and goings, my phone usage, even what time I went to bed each night. When I asked him about it, he just said he was keeping track of things. I should have been worried. Instead, I was angry. How dare he monitor me like a child? How dare he act like I was the villain when he'd been emotionally absent for months? That anger would prove to be my biggest mistake. Monday morning arrived with the harsh reality of facing my co-workers after the weekend's revelations. I'd spent Sunday night checking Loren's Instagram, watching the view counts climb on the videos that showed me dancing with strangers. The comments ranged from supportive to scandalized, but they all confirmed what Simon had said. Our private business was now public entertainment. I dressed carefully for work, choosing a conservative blouse and skirt, hoping to project an image of respectability. But the moment I walked into the office, I could feel the stares and whispers following me. "Eirene." My co-worker, Dina Morales, practically pounced on me at my desk. "Girl, I saw those videos. You looked amazing. I can't believe Simon just left you there." Dina was 38, divorced, and perpetually bitter about men in general. She'd been encouraging me to live my life for months, always ready with stories about her own post-divorce adventures and theories about why all husbands were fundamentally selfish. "It wasn't a big deal," I said quietly, hoping to avoid drawing more attention. "Not a big deal. Honey, you looked like a goddess out there. Those men couldn't keep their hands off you. Simon should be proud to have a wife that other men want. He didn't see it that way. Of course he didn't. Men are so insecure. They want us to be sexy for them, but invisible to everyone else. It's ridiculous. I wanted to believe her, wanted to accept her validation, and dismiss Simon's hurt as masculine fragility. But I couldn't shake the image of his face when he'd left the club, or the disappointment in his mother's eyes. My phone buzzed with a text from Kellen. "How are you holding up? I heard there was some drama after I dropped you off." I glanced around the office, then typed back. "It's been rough. Simon's really upset. Want to talk about it? I could meet you for coffee after work." I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the keyboard. Meeting Kellen would be crossing another line, one that might lead to places I wasn't ready to go. But the thought of going home to Simon's cold silence and Lila's worried questions made the alternative seem appealing. "Where?" I typed. "That little cafe on 5th Street, around 5:30. "I'll be there." The rest of the workday dragged by in a haze of whispered conversations and sympathetic looks from Dana. By 5 o'clock, I'd convinced myself that meeting Kellen was perfectly innocent, just a friend offering support during a difficult time. The cafe was dimly lit and intimate, the kind of place couples went for romantic dates rather than innocent coffee meetings. Kellen was already there when I arrived, looking handsome in his business suit, his smile warm and welcoming. "You look beautiful," he said as I sat down across from him. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better," I admitted. "Simon's barely speaking to me. His mother showed me the videos from Friday night, and apparently half our neighborhood has seen them. I'm sorry. I feel partly responsible. I shouldn't have encouraged you to dance with those other guys." "You didn't encourage anything. I made my own choices." Still, I could see Simon was uncomfortable. I should have backed off. His concern felt genuine, his attention focused entirely on me in a way that Simon's hadn't been in months. When he reached across the table to squeeze my hand, I didn't pull away. "You deserve better than this," he said softly. "You deserve someone who appreciates what an incredible woman you are." "Kellen, I know you're married. I respect that. But watching you come alive on that dance floor, seeing you remember who you are when you're not playing the perfect wife and mother, it was beautiful." His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand, and I felt that familiar flutter of attraction. This was dangerous territory, but God help me. I didn't want to leave. We talked for 2 hours, about everything and nothing. He told me about his job in marketing, his recent breakup, his dreams of traveling. I found myself sharing things I hadn't told anyone. My fears about becoming invisible, my loneliness, my growing certainty that Simon and I had become strangers living in the same house. "I should go," I said finally, glancing at my phone. It was almost 8 o'clock, and I'd told Simon I was working late. "Of course. But Eirene, can I see you again? Just to talk. I think you need someone who understands what you're going through." I knew I should say no. I knew I should go home, apologize to my husband, and try to rebuild what I'd damaged. Instead, I said, "I'd like that." When I got home, Simon was helping Lila with her homework at the kitchen table. They both looked up when I entered, and I could see the questions in Simon's eyes. "How was work?" he asked carefully. "Busy. I had to stay late to catch up on some filing." The lie came easily, too easily. "I called your office around 6. They said you'd left already." My heart skipped, but I kept my expression neutral. "I went to grab dinner. I wasn't hungry enough to cook when I got home." Simon studied my face for a long moment, then returned his attention to Lila's math problems. But I could see the suspicion in his eyes, the way he was filing away another inconsistency in my story. Over the next few days, I noticed Simon's note-taking becoming more systematic. He had a small notebook that he carried with him, and I caught him writing in it at odd moments. When I came home from work, when I got off the phone, when I said I was going to the grocery store. "What are you writing in that thing?" I asked one evening. "Just keeping track of things," he said, closing the notebook. For my own peace of mind. That's creepy, Simon. You're spying on your own wife. I'm documenting patterns. There's a difference. Patterns of what? You tell me, Eirene. You're the one creating them. I wanted to demand that he stop, to accuse him of being controlling and paranoid. But something in his calm demeanor warned me off. Simon had always been methodical, detail-oriented. If he was keeping notes, he had a reason. That reason became clearer when I met Kellen for coffee again on Thursday. This time, I told Simon I had a dentist appointment, a lie I thought was foolproof since he never paid attention to my medical appointments anyway. Kellen and I sat in the same intimate cafe, our conversation flowing even more easily than before. He was attentive, charming, everything I'd forgotten I wanted in a man. When he suggested we go for a walk, I agreed without thinking. The walk led us to his apartment building. When he invited me up for a drink, every rational part of my brain screamed, no. But the lonely, neglected part of me that craved attention and validation whispered yes. His apartment was stylish and masculine, with exposed brick walls and modern furniture. He poured us wine and put on soft music, creating an atmosphere that was undeniably romantic. I can't stop thinking about you, he said as we sat on his couch, closer than we should have been. Kellen, I'm married. I know, but are you happy? The question hung in the air between us. Was I happy? When was the last time I'd felt truly content with my life, my marriage, my role as Simon's wife? No, I whispered, I'm not happy. He leaned closer, his hand cupping my face. You deserve to be happy, Eirene. You deserve to feel alive. When he kissed me, I didn't pull away. I should have, but I didn't. Instead, I kissed him back, pouring months of frustration and loneliness into that moment of connection. We didn't sleep together. I wasn't ready to cross that final line, but we came close, closer than a married woman should come with any man who wasn't her husband. When I finally left his apartment, my lips were swollen from his kisses and my resolve was completely shattered. I drove home in a daze, trying to process what had happened. I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross, done something that would destroy my marriage if Simon ever found out. But instead of guilt, I felt alive for the first time in months. That feeling lasted until I walked into my house and found Simon waiting for me in the living room, his notebook open on his lap. How was the dentist? He asked quietly. Fine, just a cleaning. That's interesting, because I called Dr. Martinez's office to reschedule my appointment, and they said you didn't have one today. In fact, you haven't been there in 6 months. My blood turned to ice. I went to a different dentist, for a second opinion. What's the name of this dentist? I don't remember. It was a referral from Dina. Simon nodded slowly, writing something in his notebook. And this new dentist, did they find anything wrong? No, everything was fine. Good, I'm glad your teeth are healthy. He closed the notebook and stood up. Oh, and Eirene? Next time you decide to lie about your whereabouts, you might want to check your location services. Your phone has been pinging from downtown all afternoon, nowhere near any dental office. He walked upstairs, leaving me standing in the living room with the terrible realization that my husband was several steps ahead of me in a game I didn't even know we were playing. That night, as I lay alone in our bed, I deleted all my text messages with Kellen and turned off my location services. But I had the sinking feeling it was too late. Simon knew I was lying, and worse, he was documenting every lie. I should have been scared. Instead, I was angry. How dare he track me like a criminal? How dare he set traps for me and then act superior when I fell into them? That anger would prove to be my final undoing. Friday night felt heavy. Lila grew quiet, waking from nightmares and clinging to me when Simon was already out running. I kept texting Kellen anyway, each message a small rebellion against Simon's notebook, his questions, his new cold focus. After dinner, Simon sat at the kitchen table and finally said it. We need to talk. about my lies. He opened the notebook and read the truth I'd been dodging. Tuesday wasn't a dentist appointment. My car was outside Kellen's building for hours. My phone went dark. I tried to minimize it. Coffee, talking. Simon didn't move. He pulled up my texts. Every flirt, every complaint, even the ones I'd deleted, time-stamped, recovered, undeniable. Then he spread out more. Photos of me entering Kellen's building, credit card charges, a timeline of my excuses. I snapped that he'd driven me to it. Simon stayed calm and said he started tracking me after I started lying. Then he dropped the final blow. He'd confronted Kellen. Kellen claimed I pursued him, and he'd testify if needed. The fantasy shattered in one sentence. "I want a divorce," Simon said. "Papers are filed. You'll be served Monday." The doorbell rang before I could breathe. A woman in a suit stepped in, confirmed my name, and handed me the envelope, divorce papers and a temporary custody order. I stared at the legal language and finally understood. It wasn't a fight anymore. It was consequences, moving in. Henderson and Associates' conference room overlooked the city while my marriage collapsed in real time. Simon sat across from me with his attorney, Patricia Henderson, calm and prepared. My lawyer, David Chen, looked like he already knew the ending. Patricia opened a thick file, and Simon stated his grounds: adultery and irreconcilable differences. David asked for proof, and Patricia slid evidence across the table: location data, recovered texts, photos, credit card receipts, and club footage. Watching myself on video in that sterile room made everything look uglier and more deliberate. I insisted I'd never slept with anyone. Patricia didn't argue. She explained that adultery, legally, didn't require sex. Emotional intimacy, secrecy, and inappropriate contact were enough when documented this thoroughly. Then she moved to custody. Simon wanted primary custody and supervised visits for me pending evaluation. I stood up, panicking, and immediately sounded like the problem they were describing. Patricia cited instability and Lila's anxiety at school. When I tried blaming Simon for making me feel invisible, Patricia calmly boxed it into an admission. I was seeking attention elsewhere. Then she handed me Kellen's statement. He painted me as unstable and obsessive. Patricia followed with audio of me telling my sister I wanted to make Simon jealous. Even my own words had been collected, time-stamped, and weaponized. In the elevator afterward, I apologized. Simon's answer was quiet and final. Sorry doesn't rebuild trust. 3 weeks later, I signed the papers. He got the house in primary custody. I got supervised time and the full, irreversible cost of my choices.